Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning. I know we have people joining from many parts of the world. Thank you very much for joining the SoftCo webinar with PwC here today, and I'm delighted and like to extend my thanks to Talib and Neil from PwC for your time. Really appreciate you giving up your time to support us on this. PwC are one of our key partners for implementation, delivery, and support in general across many different facets. So really appreciate your time. I'm just going to give it a moment or two just while we leave people registrations. I think there's people still coming online here, and we will continue then. So we just have a few more people coming online here. Okay, I think we'll get going. As I said, thank you very much, Talib and Neil, for joining us here today. Very excited to bring you this webinar, given the rapid changes in the market and e-invoicing and the challenge that faces it all in terms of getting ready and adopting all the moving parts for this, and to look at it in a broader picture. And Talib and Neil have huge experience in this space in the PwC world, so delighted to get their insights around this topic. So I suppose just to kick us off and look at kind of what is all the noise about. There's been an awful lot of updates and changes in mandates in the past 12 to 18 months, particularly to kind of define what it actually is. And before we get into it, I'll just run through the session agenda here. So we're going to cover what it is in the background. Then we're going to look at, Neil's going to give us a background on what the market is doing. Industry challenges, Talib can certainly give us some background on that and what they're experiencing in the market across the board. The implementation journey, what you should consider and how you would approach. Business readiness, who do you need to involve, what are the different areas, what jurisdictions are you operating in. Global overview, kind of what are the key mandate countries coming up over the next 12 to 18 months. And then if you look at what the checklist, and then ultimately what are our key takeaways. So if we cover all these, we'll hope to finish. It's just coming on 4 minutes past 3, 45 minutes. We won't take any more of your time. If we run over a little bit with questions, please send them in on the chat. But we'd like to kick off with just kind of a little bit of background. I know there's many different people have joined this webinar. So SoftCo ourselves are an AI native P2P platform. Our core message is to reduce the touch point on invoice processing and to improve the whole invoice management process. When we look at that, reducing touch points is a key metric that we look at, and e-invoicing is a key enabler of all of that. And one of our key kind of taglines would be that we look at your solution, your requirement, and aim to tailor that to perfection for you as an end client. I won't over elaborate on that, but you can see all the detail on our website. And thank you very much for joining. So what is e-invoicing? I suppose looking where we've come from, pre-COVID, there was a huge, probably 50% of people were sending invoices in by email and PDF to many different organizations. Then we had the advent of COVID and everybody switched to PDF overnight. It was just required by the industry and across the board. And what we did now, I think what we're facing is the next kind of huge change of where European mandates and global mandates are coming in around the invoicing. So we're transitioning away from a PDF to a data format. And to do that, we're going to have networks to allow us to connect in as buyers and suppliers across the board. And there's many certified access points onto these networks. And governments are essentially adopting that as a method for tax collection and reducing fraud and giving them an awful lot more control and visibility over the spend. There is upside though for many companies. It's faster processing, reduces the cost of the invoice, possibly better supplier relations if we're paying on time. Reduced errors is a huge one, a complete audit trail. But we're adopting a process that's coming at us in waves. I think over the next 5 years, there's a forecast that we would shift from probably 10-15% e-invoicing across the board right now, to maybe within 85% in the next 5 years. And I think that's kind of the bigger backdrop to it. There's a few different models in the industry, and I might ask Talib just to jump in here. And again, just to introduce Talib, thank you very much for joining. So you might maybe give some background on yourself, Talib, and your experience, and then where you see the differences in the models.
Yeah, thanks, Killian. Yeah, so I'm Talib. I'm from the I'm from the tax technology team here, based in the UK from PwC. And to the point that Killian's made, right, there are several e-invoicing transmission models, and unfortunately enough, every single mandate is different. Each country has got a selection of transmission model that they've chosen to go with. And as you can see on the slide here, there's something called a clearance model, the Peppol, and the five-corner model. What this means, right, for businesses is that depending on your footprint, depending on whichever country that you are, present, this means that you might have to face multiple different types of transmission models, and that means you need to also be ready in terms of your AR and AP process to manage all of this. And the core of it, right, is it lies with your understanding of what each model means. For instance, in a clearance model, it effectively your electronic invoices will have to be sent to the tax authority first for validation. And unless it passes that validation, right, you are not going to be able to raise the invoice or to send it to your customer. In a Peppol network model or in an interoperability model, right, that tax authority validation is absent. Notwithstanding that, you will still need to ensure that you've got enough data points within your semantic model to send it across the authorized technology. And when I say authorized technology, it basically refers to technology that has been approved and authorized by the tax authority for you to use in order for you to send and receive your electronic invoices. Likewise, a five-corner model is similar to the 4-1, but there's also the presence of the authority that will be pulling the data. So effectively, what this means is that the tax authority or the relevant authority, right, will be able to receive all of your data points in real time, which means that there's an increased need for you to ensure that the data quality is there. And as to the point I made earlier on, if you do not have the necessary or mandatory data points, you will not be able to meet the transmission requirement, which is highly consequential because you're not going to be able to raise your invoice and you're not going to be able to get paid. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Talib. One of the things here, I suppose just to get some background from you, Neil, and you've been very active in the market and working in PwC from here, is what is the market doing across the board? And like, I suppose we have some key points here that we want to talk through. So you might give some background as kind of what you're seeing going on in the market with e-invoicing and how things are evolving.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'm Neil. I'm a director in the tax technology team at PwC. Been in the sector 7-8 years now. Fascinating time is how I would describe this. Lots of our clients have lots of different agendas, lots of different requirements, but it always comes back to what do we do about e-invoicing? What's going on with the market and what's everyone else doing? So e-invoicing itself has been around a while. Depends on who you ask, but a couple of decades you could qualify. But the difference now, of course, is that the new mandates, the new need to be compliant in territories is coming thick and fast, apace. What we want to do today is demystify the journey for you a little bit around that. But let me kind of give you some, hopefully, food for thought. Now, every one of you on the call will have a different start point for this journey. Some of you may already be on it. Some of you may already have had to look at territories and make a plan. The problem you have now is that for the first time in my career, I've got external tech firms and platforms saying we are overwhelmed. So to be compliant and to use our solution, we're going to need a long lead time to get engaged. Now, if you think about when you last implemented any external tools, any external solutions, think about the kind of internal time. You identified you had a need to do something. Then you may have gone to RFP, you may have gone out to do a market assessment, and then you actually need to implement it. So all of that takes time. So we've had clients, Talib and I have been on calls where we've had clients saying to us, oh, well, you know, we don't have to worry too much until 28 or 29 when we think our first requirements are. But then when you do a count back on that journey, then suddenly you realize that actually you need to be starting to look at it now, because you're going to take 3 to 6 months to get internal sign off and budget. You're going to need to align all the stakeholders in your firm, and we'll come to that a bit later on. And then you need to go to market and then implement and have a solution that's ready that fits in with everyone else's agenda. Because to go back to the point I made earlier, we've all got a different start point, but the compliance date is fixed. So you all need to be in the same position at that point, as Talib said quite well there, to make your money. So to go to the slides, a number of different ways you can look to be compliant for this. As I said, external vendors are already talking to us about the uptick in demand and how overwhelmed they are. They haven't got the people, they haven't got the scalability, interesting, to deliver solutions for clients. Obviously, you may, depends on what ERP solutions, etc. you use as well, you may look to do it kind of internally, but be aware of a point Taleb's already made here, that there are compliance requirements from the local tax authorities, and not all ERP extensions have that. So fundamentally, this is a time piece. A lot of the work that you'll need to be doing will be done up front. So, you know, really do factor in enough time to sort of count back from your first deadline. As a final point and a final thought, and again, we'll revisit this later in the presentation, I would also ask you to try and have a look at it as a whole. So rather than go piecemeal and fix a problem as it arrives, have a think of the larger picture. Because by 2030, when VIDA comes along, you'll have to have adapted all of your territories to make it work. So do a big job once, rather than lots of small jobs where you're constantly correcting what you've done before. So I hope that was helpful. Talib, should we move on to the next slide?
Yeah. So I think industry challenges is probably the key things, and what we'd like to do here is just launch a poll first, just to kind of get some guidance from you as an audience, and we have a very large audience, and thank you again for joining. So I'm just going to launch a poll here very quickly, and if we can get a quick response, I'll give this a mention. So I think everyone should be able to see the poll live there right now. And let's give it a moment. I see people are still voting here. Okay, just going to give it a moment there. Thank you very much. Still getting a few latecomers. Anyone else want to vote there? Okay, so just moving on to the industry challenges. So looking at that, Talib, maybe you might give us some background of what you're seeing in the market. I know you've got extensive experience for many years in the space, and it's been evolving. So to align on what kind of some of the things you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Killian. So we've seen that the introduction of electronic invoicing or e-invoicing means that there has got to be certain actions, right, that needs to be addressed. Number one being the data points or the data requirements, and secondly, the transmission of the invoices. In between that, though, right, there are simply many practical implications to businesses. So what we've got here is basically a non-exhaustive list of practical implications that e-invoicing brings towards a business. Because along with the data requirements and transmission requirement, there are also other nuances around electronic invoicing, certain introductions of process change that might be required. So off the top of my head, as an example, in a number of jurisdictions like Belgium, right, they are basically saying that for the invoice to be an e-invoice mandate requirement, it's got to be a VATable invoice. So having said that, only invoices that are VATable in the country, right, will have to go through the e-invoicing mechanism. Now, in terms of practicality, right, as a business, you might want to look into your current process for your AR. Do you currently identify, a split in how you're sending the invoices? Do you have a process in place for that? If you do not, right, then obviously you need to go into detail as to how you want to change that, because the reality is that if you are unaware of that implication, right, and if you start to send all of your invoices via electronic invoices, whereas you only need to send the VATable ones, right, your customers might not receive them. They might still be expecting to receive invoices via the traditional method if there's no VAT on it. So that's an example of one practical implication, which is on the process. Another one, which is far more, I would say far more consequential, would be the readiness of your data. A lot of the effort into getting ready for electronic invoicing, right, is front-loaded. I would dare say probably about 70% of your effort will be front-loaded into making sure that, number one, have you got the correct level of data attributes that's been configured within your ERP system to meet the mandate requirement? Because the reality is that when e-invoicing goes live, the data requirements tend to go up as well. We are looking at about more than 200 data points that's got to be configured. And on top of that, right, not only have to have the data points configured within your ERP system, you will also have to ensure that the quality of data that you're maintaining within your system is up to scratch. Because again, to the point I made earlier on, if these mandatory data points are not managed, you will fail the semantic test. You're not going to be able to raise the invoice. So in a lot of businesses that we work with, we observe that data quality is a huge issue, and that in itself will require a lot of time and effort to fix, because you have to start to look into who are the stakeholders, who are the data owners. For me, sitting in tax, right, one of the observations that we often have is tax as a function ingests or uses a lot of the data, but they're not fully in control of the data in itself. So you're gonna have to start to look into your master data management process. How is that being managed? How is the quality being maintained? Another example of a practical implication is on the archiving. What's your current policy? What is the method of you to be able to access that data that you archived? Because again, with the introduction of electronic invoicing, the very definition of what an invoice is would have changed as well. In countries like Poland, your e-invoice will be the legally recognized format going forward in order for you to take on a tax deduction, for example, right? So PDF invoices, obviously they are helpful. It's human readable. It's not exactly something complicated. You can just look at it. You can know what the details are, right? But with e-invoicing, right, all of that becomes really complicated. So you need to look into your process. So all in all, the messaging here is that apart from the data and transmission requirement, there are a lot of in-between problems and practical challenges that businesses will face.
Yeah. So I think the key thing there is probably, Talib, is as you highlighted there, the invoice structure and display. There's receiving an invoice. So how do you receive? And that's, like we said earlier on with the e-invoicing itself, that you will have an access point. So you need to process and receive an invoice. And then from your own accounts receivable function, your ERP, be it SAP or Oracle, you will need to generate an AR invoice. A sales invoice will have all the requisite parts, and to be very aware there of the data elements that are required on an e-invoice generation. And we'll come to some of the standards later on, but ultimately printing an invoice and generating a data point invoice can require different challenges in terms of the output, but you also, like you've said there, in terms of the numbering, the line item descriptions, the product service codes, there's more detail required to generate this, and it will take a bit of thought process, particularly on the AR side. I think receiving it from a processing point of view is probably the simpler side of the fence. Generating an AR invoice for some people can be, it's not that it's impossible by any means, but you just have to have your ducks in a row.
Actually, that's a really good point as well, Killian. On the receiving end, there will be some challenges as well. As to whether how you're currently doing your PO matching, how you're currently reviewing that, because in some jurisdictions they have started to introduce rules such as having an approval method for your AP process condensed to just 72 hours as an example. So if you look at your AP process, right, if it's inefficient, if you take, say, 5 days to approve it, right, when e-invoicing goes live in some countries, you might have to condense that into 72 hours, because if you fail to do so, right, what might happen is that invoice, the AP invoice you receive, will be automatically accepted. And that means that you have to go back to your commercial team and inform your vendor, say, hey, can you please raise a credit note, right? So there will be some process change that's required from AP perspective as well.
What countries does that apply in, Talib, in case people are getting very nervous, because there's quite a lot of viewers online?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I believe Malaysia is one of them. And I think in Poland, if I'm not wrong, we'll need to confirm this, but if I'm not wrong, in Poland, there will be no rejection mechanism.
Yeah.
So it means basically you have to inform your vendor and ask for a cancellation as opposed to rejecting it.
So just to explain that in a bit more detail, you're saying if I'm a supplier, or if I'm a person, I'm getting a supplier invoice, I receive it, it comes off the access point from the network into my application, I've accepted it as a valid invoice. The government mandate in Poland is that that invoice should be approved internally to be paid by terms within 72 hours.
It would have been accepted and approved via the transmission mechanism. But if you disagree, for example, based on the commercial detail of it, if it's incorrect value, for example,
you have 72 hours to challenge it.
Yeah. So you have to raise a challenge outside of that.
Right. That's an important point just to have, because if Poland's obviously live with the KESF model, I think early this year. So if you're operating and trading in those countries, you need to be aware of those things.
Yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that there are all of these in between practical issues that they will come up as and when you try to, or you attempt to get ready for invoicing.
Okay. We're going to move on to the implementation journey. So if we just look at the overall process, Talib, I know you're kind of saying we're kind of leading into this as we go along, but if we look at what are the areas people should consider at a high level, and we'll get into more of a detailed thing in a moment, but across the board there's a number of different touch points, so maybe you might just elaborate on some of these as you see, and Neil, jump in, feel free if you want to jump in on this as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, appreciate that we've been giving lots of scary stories, so far, what the issues are, what the concerns are, challenges. Having said that, there is generally there's generally an implementation plan that we would highly recommend, and it's sort of broken down into these 6 steps that we've got here on the slide. And it all begins with understanding what your business impact is. And that means looking into your country footprint, understanding which mandates are coming on board, and also understanding how you currently are operating in those countries, whether you've got a shared service center that manages all of your finance processes centrally, whether you've got a decentralized local function. So it's all about understanding what the impact is at the highest level. And once you start to understand that, you can start to then look into what the process gaps are at a slightly granular level. But I would dare say, on the governance piece, that's probably one of the most important bit, because it's invoicing, right? Even though it's a finance-led process, the total ownership of that is very often debated within businesses, because the regulation in itself, they are overseen by tax authorities. So within businesses, there's a number of confusion. Is this a tax stakeholder or problem, or is this a finance stakeholder problem? The truth is, right, it impacts stakeholders across the business, including IT, even procurement as well. So it's really about understanding how you intend to govern this, who will be spearheading the implementation projects, and who should be consulted. So it really is a problem for everyone to address together, right? Yeah, and then of course we've got the understanding of the formats that's required, the data points, requirements, and evaluating your solutions thereafter. The solutions bit is fairly interesting, because to the point that Neil made earlier on, right? E-invoicing is not new. You might have some semblance of compliance in 1 or 2 countries, so you might have some local solutions that's already been put in place. What you want here is a centralized solution strategy that will allow you, right, to scale very quickly and be more efficient and not cost you so much. Because the thing is, it hasn't hit critical mass in the past, right? You might have only 1 or 2 countries, so you might end up having 1 or 2 contracts. But if you do not have a solution strategy in place, right, you might end up, having a patchwork of solutions here and there. You might end up having 4 or 5 different contracts, 4 or 5 different processes. It's highly inefficient, and without having that strategy in place, also, every single mandate that gets announced or go live, right, it becomes a whole brand new project, as opposed to having a centralized, harmonized strategy which you can easily scale up. So that solution bit is really important for everyone to consider, especially, again, if you are going through a finance transformation program where you are in an ERP implementation program with the business. You might want to start to see if you can insert e-invoicing as a key design decision upfront. So when you have this KDD upfront, right, you can call it out as you are in flight in that program. You can call it out as to what boundary systems you want to put in place to help you manage e-invoicing mandates. So yeah, and then of course you've got the implementation, how you want to approach implementation, who your key stakeholders are. Certain questions that will be asked of implementation would be whether you want to have a fully integrated product that is fully automated, which means having API connections with your ERP systems, or do you want to have as an interim solution, you want to have a manual process whereby you are generating your electronic invoicing onto manual templates that you can upload yourself. Typically that happens with businesses that have smaller footprint, because the integration point is something that can be quite heavy in terms of effort. So all of that needs to be considered when you're implementing your solution. And last but not least, post go live, how do you then marry your e-invoicing efforts across the rest of the tax reporting processes, and how do you then monitor number one, the SLAs, monitor the performance of your current existing invoicing solution, and how do you then monitor upcoming mandates? So effectively these are at high level the steps that we recommend for businesses to consider in undergoing your journey.
Okay, thank you, Tal. I was going to move on and just look at business readiness, but before that I'd just like to do a quick poll on across the audience here, and just ask you who owns e-invoicing compliance in your organization, because as Talib said there, it can live in many different departments and people think it's the responsibility of other things. So just sort of quick poll. So I'm just going to start that there. So I think the clear message from what Talib and Neil have been saying is that it's very much live between IP or AP team and finance, but possibly tax or IT are not involved or to look at it all, and are maybe not defined at all as a challenge. So very good. We have some questions.
To the point, projects like this will always need a leadership, but yeah, very much it's across all parts of the business, and you'll save yourselves a huge amount of time early on if you can align all the stakeholders early, so everyone's on every step of the journey, because it does touch many parts of the business. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to stop the poll there a second. I notice people still voting there, so I'll just give you a 10-second count there to vote, to complete the poll a bit more, if there's any more on to vote. Okay, so just getting on to the business readiness, I suppose, looking at all of this and looking across all the various different teams, you're often going, again, how do we approach this? And when we look at this in a bit more detail and just relevant to the poll there about tax and finance and fragment adoption, and whether you're upfront in terms of your central strategy or governance, what we've seen, just I suppose, just as a discussion point in this slide for a moment, is we have many different customers that have, I'm going to say, offices, facilities in the Nordic region, Norway, Finland, and there's a huge adoption of e-invoicing in those jurisdictions, particularly in the Finnish government, where we have two invoice formats called FinInvoice and TEAPS, and then if you go into Norway and Denmark, there's other formats that are adopted up there. And I think the natural inclination of lots of companies up to this has been just adopt the in-country process and requirements as they come online. As you said, Talib, and alluded to, this is not widely adopted across the board. So as a result, you're kind of dealing with point solutions, and it encourages behavior. Even for Belgium there, we had stuff last year with people adopting small minor solutions and not looking at the broader strategy. So what we're encouraging here, I suppose, is to take a step back from the individual countries and go, what's our plan across the board, and how do we have this as probably a work stream that's going to be continuously monitored over the next 3 to 5 years, that everyone's going to be adopting, because we will come and share. I know some of the questions there in relation to what countries are in scope, and we will share all this information in slides after, but there is an oncoming stream of customers coming, or countries coming online. But maybe, Neil, if you want to kind of give some backdrop here in terms of what you think of business readiness, how people will go about this.
Yeah, sure. That's a risk of saying something obvious. I think it's more around understanding the breadth of the problem at outset. So it's there's a lot of concern in the market already, lots of noise around e-invoicing. But if you scope the project, you work with partners to fully understand what is it you've got to deliver by the end, then we can correctly design and develop a plan whereby you can ensure you cover all of the various quirks. Talib touched on it a bit earlier. Wouldn't it be great if every territory who has announced an e-invoicing mandate had the same requirements per territory? Wouldn't that be amazing? Sadly, it doesn't work like that. What we're finding is there are huge differences between the levels of data, the levels of reporting, and also kind of what's been implemented and when, what the requirements are per territory. So there's a lot of moving parts. We know the UK have committed to launch e-invoicing in April 29. However, that is currently being debated and discussed. So we are part of a reporting group that is dealing with HMRC to confirm the scope. What's the how is that going to look? What kind of rules and regs are we going to require for a UK? So this will change. So everything we're talking to you about today will evolve, and it's about staying informed, making sure that the partners you're selecting are versatile and can adapt as these various needs tweak, move, and take a different shape. So as I said, back to a point we made earlier, all parts of your firm could be impacted. It would be great to have a team together at outset, so you're clear on the brief, you're clear on the need to act, and most importantly, you're working well ahead as to when the first mandate drops. As I said,
yeah, I should also add on that. Whilst you might think 2028, 2029 is far away, right? It's not. We are seeing that the effort that's required, right, can straddle over like half a year, up to 8 months, because of the challenges I mentioned earlier on. This is, beyond compliance. This is also a fantastic opportunity for businesses to look into transforming the way that things are being done. From a working capital point of view, right? With e-invoicing in place, that means that you might be able to be more efficient in your invoicing process. Faster access to working capital. That in itself, right, is a selling point for optimization. So beyond compliance, there are other benefits into looking at the program in itself. But going back to the point about the time frame, right? It is urgent. 2028 is 2029, couple of years. It's not too far away. So it's sort of almost a rally for the business right now to start getting themselves ready.
I think one of the key lines for me there is to use e-invoicing as an opportunity for business transformation, not just compliance, because it's not the tail wagging the dog in terms of compliance journey. I think one of the key things that we would see in all our AP projects and assessments, and we do kind of AP assessments for companies and kind of maturity to go, look, here's some recommendations. You mightn't be in the market to look at an AP process right now, but here's what I think you should consider. And one of the biggest challenges lots of them have is poor data quality on documents, poor methods of receiving invoices, and e-invoicing is going to eliminate that on both sides of the fence. You have to, issue it, but also be able to process correctly. So I think overall, solution design, looking at this as a business transformation, I think you referred to it there, Neil, lots of companies are going through huge transformation projects to the cloud, and this is a work stream that needs to fall into that. And really to tie in with all of this, there's multi-threads on this in terms of tax reporting. I know in the UK there's e-invoicing for the UK will have some implications with the CIS invoicing, withholding tax, that kind of stuff. So just there's some questions coming in there, and they're all great. Please keep them coming. Just as a bit of a sidebar, Talib, I don't want to catch you off guard. In terms of the UK invoicing for CIS tax invoices, that would all align with that, I assume, down the line.
Yeah, it's still fully under consultation right now. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. So going into the global overview then, look, there's many countries that are coming online. And if I just bring these up here for a second, we've talked there about kind of how people would approach it and look there, but I just want to launch another poll there, just kind of seeing what markets would be relevant to different people here just for a moment. And then I'll just talk about, and there's 2 questions I want to quickly go with. So you may have different countries that are relevant, and I think some of the stats coming through and stuff and various things, many countries I think now, and we would see it, have shared service, have facilities, they're trading with many countries. The world has become a much smaller place in terms of trading, so we have to be aware of these. And I think you touched there about the nuances of different countries, and France coming online in September obviously has a few different tricky challenges there, and people will be looking at for advice. So following on from this, if anyone wants to reach out to us or get in touch with Talib or Neil to engage on that, feel free to do so. We can share their details. The two guys here are experts in their field and understand the market very, very well. And you may be that you're not even sure as to what countries that you have to support it. I think there's a lot of nervousness around this and people are not too sure. But looking at it from our side, Neil and Talib, I suppose we would have people that are trading with Italy has obviously been around a long time. Belgium just came in January. Poland is there now. France, Germany. Is there any ones in the immediate timeline that are things that we need to watch out for, or any kind of immediate things that we should call out? That I know if you look down through the kind of 4 mandatory ones coming up there that we've highlighted in the middle of the screen, they have different formats, they have different models that we refer to here, the Peppol 4-corner, the clearance model, the 5-corner here in France. Is there anything particular in any of those that you would say watch out for? I know you mentioned there about the one scenario where you accept the thing. Is there anything nuance in any country there?
You need to approach with caution. That would be my summary of all that.
Okay.
Absolutely. I say it's all back to the plan. So off the top of my head, Nuances, none are coming to the fore, but my all of them, as you can see, have slightly different requirements, slightly different impacts potentially on your workflow. Because what we've talked about is, what your company, who your company know you have, what territories you have responsibilities for currently. But clearly, companies evolve too. So if you're acquiring parties, if you're expanding into new territories and new regions, all of this becomes a new consideration for making those decisions too. So it is a massive awareness piece for your business. We'll keep doing events such as this to share knowledge as we learn, and as our teams become more and more connected to the market, and we have more and more experience of some of the quirks that we find, some nuances. Do we find that some of the technology available is more easy to adapt and to work with your particular requirements? So all of this is a learning for all of us, but it's constantly evolving, and that's the key to this. It's not a fix it today, that's the solution done. It is a genuine ongoing piece of work for the firms themselves, but also for us as third parties who are working in the space, understanding how these new requirements are impacting business, what demands they have on where we're going. So it's a bit waffly, but I think you get the point.
I should caveat that to your point, Neil. It is ever changing. So whatever that you see here today, right, it's as of today. You might never know tomorrow. One of the countries might say, hey, we decide to postpone it, or we're going to push it forward, right? You just never know. Because Poland, if I remember correctly, was meant to go live a couple of years ago. But as a result of the change in the government, they decided to audit the e-invoicing mandate, and finally it's going live this year after a few false starts. So the list, it is non-exhaustive, and it is up to today, but it might be different tomorrow.
I think as well what we can share out of this is there's differences between cross-border and domestic as well, and I think as well there's some earlier requirements around B2G in terms of government mandates, and then B2B. So, and to your point about Poland, Spain also tried it some back, and I think given the fact there's been a couple of false starts in different countries along the way, people are now seeing that, okay, what is required, and also the governments are also realizing that given the scale of companies they're potentially trying to operate with, that they need to give people time to adopt this, and they've given required time. So people are more and more aware of this, and it's becoming a part of a standard work stream. Just very quickly, I'm just conscious time we're heading for 15:45. We just have a quick checklist here, I suppose, and then what are some practical things to get online with e-invoicing if you have to go on that. So we'll just flick on to one or two of these. So just on the checklist, Talib or Neil, if you have anything you want to add there very quickly.
Yeah, it's just about looking firstly at your country footprint, right? And then secondly, in each and every one of the countries, understanding what your tax and legal requirements are with an e-invoicing lens. So once you start to build out that picture in terms of your reporting requirements or invoicing requirement, that will then allow you to go into the level 2 drill down as to what exactly needs to be done, what needs to be addressed to get yourself to tick it off one by one here.
Right. Anything to add to that, Neil?
No, I'm good with that.
Okay. So one thing I suppose I just wanted to highlight here is that the Peppol network is probably the European standard. Would you agree, Tal? Because that's kind of where Belgium and Poland and all them are leaning towards. And you would think, I know it's not confirmed yet, I believe, for the UK that they will adopt the Peppol standards and network, but I think you said, wouldn't it be ideal, Neil, if everyone had the same standard and same requirements? But
wouldn't it?
Generally,
it's being discussed, but from what I understand, it's yet to be confirmed. But likely it will be. As a matter of fact, the UK is currently on the Peppol network. If you are invoicing the NHS, so only the NHS is in scope right now in the UK, and they are on the Peppol network. As a matter of fact, however, for the wider B2B stuff, that remains to be confirmed. So I do not want to commit to anything right now.
No, I get that, and like you said, it's an evolving requirement that the government have free rein to change what they need. But I think from our side, to look at it and say, given the NHS are on that space, but certainly in some of the other countries with France and the 5-corner model for integrating with the government, I suppose thinking about your solution provider and process there, when you're looking to onboard, first of all, you have to get a Peppol ID, which is very clean. Then you will, with your solution provider, determine what documents you're sending. So we talked about the AP and AR, and we did the texting with the access point, and you can start exchanging documents. Many companies that are thinking about getting on, or have the France requirement, that's probably the next immediate country, will have suppliers who are operating in the space already. I know when we looked at some of our customers for Christmas, they had 10 or 12 suppliers automatically that were trading with Peppol access points, so the onboarding of those suppliers was quite easy. And I suppose ultimately what I'm saying is, it is a reasonably straightforward process if you're dealing with people who are actively engaged in the market and have process from there. Looking at your data and your ERP or your AP tools, there's many ways you can configure this, but it's in terms of timing. If you've got a short timeline, I know we turned around some examples on this in a 3-month window to get somebody operational very quickly, but they had done their planning in advance. But I think what we're saying is, don't be doing a short circuit process, look at it in a bigger thing, because this is becoming a bigger project across the board and across Europe. Just moving on to our key takeaways. I don't know, Talib, if you want to re-summarize any of those points, or Neil, jump in.
Yeah, I suppose the main point here, or rather the most important one, is a mobilization of the stakeholders within the organization. I do not like to repeat myself too many times, but the implications are massive, right? And it reverberates across various functions, and so early mobilization is really important, and that can mean having a bit of an educational piece across the various stakeholders within the business, and also it's the same thing that we are saying here, right? The same scary stories, right? You can't raise your invoice, you can't get paid, you can't pay your vendors, you might fail within your SLAs or your KPIs. So that early mobilization is the most important thing right now, and that can only be done if you fully understand that your BAU, your business as usual process, will be affected. And as soon as that happens, right, everything else will fall in line naturally.
I think as well, communicate with there's lots of people we see that have shared service centers, but there's people that have local AP staff and different requirements. I'm just using Belgium as the most recent example. Or we've got many customers with offices and locations in France that are apprehensive about this ongoing change. So what you're saying there about cross-functional task forces, but also cross-country or jurisdiction, that everyone is aware and people learn from the awareness and kind of onboarding times for each different jurisdiction, that there's an alignment of that saying, look, we made these mistakes in Belgium, don't fall into the same mistakes in France. Look, from our side, I think you guys are very much appreciated for joining this call, and we're coming to the end of it. If anyone has any other questions, there's been loads of conversations and questions coming through there. You'll be, I think we've answered some of them indirectly through conversation here. If anyone would like to reach out, we can share Talib and Neil's different things. I just want to launch one final poll before we finish up. It's just about what do you plan to invest in e-invoicing or compliance automation. I'll just ask you to look at that for a few moments. But to summarize, I suppose, thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Talib and Neil, for your time. It's been very insightful. I think the message is tread carefully, plan, and keep an eye on the changes. We plan to be running one of these probably every 6 months. One again, possibly just before June, to see if there's any changes. It won't be as in-depth or whatever, but I think then keep an eye on what's happening coming up on the France legislation. Is there any gotchas there? And then as we head into 2027, there's probably different changes coming there, and there might be more updates on the UK approach. But I would just like to thank everybody again for joining, and thank you guys, and we will wrap it up. Thank you very much. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Talib.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.